edtech industry has seen on a transformative journey accelerated by the global pandemic, technological advancements, and the need for more flexible and accessible learning models. Whether it's in K 12, higher education, or professional training, the way we approach learning has changed dramatically in recent years. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Analytics Insight podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and society, diving deep into the innovations that are shaping the future. And I'm your host, Priya Dilani. Now, today, education isn't just confined to the four walls of a classroom. It's happening online, across borders, in real time, and at the learner space as well. And today, we are talking about one of the most dynamic sectors in the world today, education technology, or as we call it, as the edtech industry. So let's welcome Deepak Joy Cheenath, co-founder of Quizizz. Hi, Deepak. How are you doing?
Hi, Priya. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you with us on a podcast. And I think today we are going to talk about one of the most interesting industries, edtech, which has definitely seen a lot of boom in the recent years. But before that, let's talk about more about Quizizz. Quite an interesting name. And if you could tell us more about Quizizz and some of the key USPs or specialization the company's into.
Yeah. So, in a gist, I think Quizizz is an instructional suite. So it's a collection of tools and a platform that allows teachers to really engage with their students, right? This can take multiple forms like online lessons, interactive quizzes, interactive videos, and other formats that, people typically tend to use for learning and practice, right? So Quiz is one of the largest platforms to do this, right? We serve over 80 million teachers and students every month. And every month, these students are solving over 1 billion questions on the platform. And what we really focus on is, bringing a class alive, right? So you mentioned that, learning is happening in all kinds of places. We focus largely on K-12 education, so kindergarten to 12th, where a lot of the learning is still happening in a classroom, and that is where we were, at least from the time we started, we started with a focus there, and over the years, it has extended to homework assignments and independent learning in other domains, but our big focus continues to be really supercharging the classroom experience and taking what often can be, not the best experience for a student and making it a lot more engaging, interactive, and fun. Yeah.
Great. I think it's fascinating to hear how Quizzes combines technology and education to make learning more interactive and accessible. And of course, we'll be talking more about it deeper moving ahead. But talking about you, Deepak, I think you have been a true software engineer at heart, and you have a passion for creating applications that empower and delight users. So, can you tell us more about your role, your contribution towards the company? How has your journey been till date? Or what led you to focus on edtech?
Sure. So, very briefly, I studied engineering in college and, started my career as a software engineer. I worked at Amazon for a year and a half before me and my co-founder, also, my batchmate from college, Ankit, who the two of us decided to, pursue this startup in the field of education. We were pretty young in those days, and probably didn't know, all about what it meant to do a startup, but we were excited to build applications, right? I think we really loved creating things that a lot of people could use, and I think that was the motivation. Like, why not try doing something, and let's see if we can build something great that'll be useful to the world. And in those days, that was the time when accelerators like Y Combinator were getting popular, and people, there was this view that if you build something useful, you'll figure out the rest of the business in time, right? So yeah, with that confidence, we quit our jobs and started working with a school in Bangalore to start learning about what might work, right, and build some prototypes, and we started testing it with the users there. And yeah, it's over 9 years since then. So for the first few years, I was me and my co-founder and some of the early team. It was a very engineering heavy team, and we would sort of figure out other things as we, the best we could. But I think we were able to, build decent products and grow, and through that able to raise funding and all of that. And over the years, the team has grown, and now we have over 250 people. But today my role is more around, I work with our product teams and generally around, planning what we're going to build next, sharing feedback, that kind of thing. So largely around product development. Yeah.
Great. I think quite an inspiring journey, Deepak, and I think your role seems to be pretty pivotal in shaping Quiz's journey and the future ahead as well. While the term edtech may feel pretty modern, while when we're integrating technology into education, but this has been around for decades. Now, early attempts were focused on things like computer-based training and distance learning programs. However, with the rise of the internet, smartphones, and even cloud-based platforms, the edtech industry has evolved from a mere simple education software to an entire comprehensive ecosystem of a suite of tools that are designed to enhance every aspect of learning. I want to understand from you what are your views on the current landscape of artificial intelligence in education? Because everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, so why not talk about AI in
Yeah.
education as well?
Yeah, for sure. Right. I think that, I think it is definitely a big theme, right? I think every school, every teacher, every student is thinking about, how AI will affect learning for them, right? And I think even governments and across the board, people know that this is going to have a big impact, right? On the future of, careers and everything, right? So it just makes sense for, people to be taking this head on because, for example, if I take a principal, right? They can't earlier, there were ways to, you could sort of block out technology, right? You could just say, okay, we won't use, computers or, tablets or anything like that in class, and all our assignments will be on paper. But today, once the kids go home, they have access to all of this, right? So they have to think about, okay, is this assignment something that an AI will be able to generate, an answer to, all right? Or should I not be educating my students about, what they should and shouldn't do with AI, right? That, because it subverts maybe the purpose of them coming to school, right? If they just, it's one thing to use AI to do research for a paper, right? It's one that you just put the prompt in and copy paste what comes out, right? And the former is something that, all everyone I think has come to realize is something we need to support and encourage, right? The right usage of AI. So yeah, I think that it's definitely a thing I see being embraced across the board, right? I don't think that people are, you know, trying to push it away or say that this is, not important, which I do think was the case, say, in the past with other forms of technology in the classroom, right? Like when, these screens started showing up in classrooms with, some clunky software that might, have some simulation, or, they would have a good marketing pitch, but, they rarely ended up being useful to the teacher itself, right? Because it would, at most be, somewhat useful in certain situations. But it was not really solving bigger pain points for them. And so a lot of teachers felt like, if this is all I get, then, it's not worth the hassle, right? Like if I have to do 10 steps to, get my kids to do an assessment, I'd rather do that on paper. And there was all this friction involved with using this technology. And that is a big part of the problem even today, right? When it comes to classroom learning and most of the, traditional forms of learning, we keep seeing, right, how, an in-person class still ends up trumping, all these other, these digital learning courses and all of that, right? When somebody really wants to learn something, they go to the best university they can and they get a degree from there, right? And there's really still no online replacement. But yeah, when it comes to AI, I do think it has a role to play in everything, right? So when it, whether it's, traditional education or online education or, self-driven learning, right? So yeah, I think in short, it affects everything. And especially for quizzes, it's definitely a thing that is front and center for every single team of ours, right from content creation to grading to the student experience and support for going from being more of taking assessments and turning them into a learning experience, right? AI is powering a lot of that, those experiences. And I think everybody is in early stages, but today we have millions of students and teachers using these features every day.
Great, and I think it's interesting how AI is not only improving learning outcomes but also providing teachers with the tools they need to better serve their students. And I think your quiz is at the forefront of reshaping how education and AI can intersect together effectively. So, can you walk us through how your platform is leveraging AI to democratize learning and make it more accessible for students of all backgrounds?
Yeah. Happy to share that, right? I think that is a big focus, right, in terms of how do we, make learning accessible to even just starting with every student in a classroom, right, of a teacher, right? The fact is that, if 40 students go to a class, not all 40 of them are having a great learning experience, right? Because unfortunately, it's just impossible for one human being to cater to the unique needs of all those students, right? If I had to, you know, I can probably teach one person, about a topic I know really well. If you bring two people in, now already, it's a bit tough, right? If they're from very different, levels of understanding or, learning styles, then I may, have to, it'll be a bit tough, but I can probably manage, right? Uh, Once it is three or four, it gets, pretty tough, right? I'll probably not be paying attention to one or two of them. But just imagine, you have 40 students. It's just impossible, right? To really even know what each of them is thinking, right? If it's a 40-minute class, you literally have 1 minute per student, right? And you have a whole syllabus to cover, right? So more often than not, you're going to have to sort of make an assumption of what maybe is, the middle of the class and teach to kind of this imaginary middle student, right? And hope that, that's good enough to, at least make it, mostly useful to half the class or whatever best thing you can manage, right? It all really, teachers are in that sense, it's very tough, right? If you have very different levels of achievement in one class, it's nearly impossible to do a great job, right? You need help, and that's where I think Quizizz comes in, right? It is about giving that teacher the tools to manage this very tough problem more effectively, right? So one way to do that is just to get the students involved in the experience, right? So if if a teacher is just writing the solution to a question on the board, that's a very one way broadcast sort of experience, right? If the students are, but the moment you flip that and give a question to every student to do, it totally changes things, right? Now they've got like a question, and maybe if it's a multiple choice, they have to now pick among four choices, right? So now you know they are now solving it to see if they get it right. Now they click their answer, and you can craft that experience in a way that it's a lot more interesting, right? Now we all answer, if you ever done like a Twitter poll, right? You want to see, okay, I answered this, but what did everybody else answer, right? All of these things come into, even if simple, they totally change that one way broadcast to being a much more interactive and fun experience. Now if you take that same thing and say, we'll do 10 questions and we'll keep a leaderboard also, right? Now that's even more interesting. Or now you can see, oh, how am I going up and down this leaderboard, right? Now you can add some fun elements on top, right, where you can maybe unlock some coins and use that to buy a power up that lets you steal 500 points from a friend once in a while, right? And this again, or maybe an enemy also, right? And you can all of this sort of still keeps the focus though on the questions, right? Because in the end, that's the centerpiece, right? We want students to focus on what is the core task that the teacher has set out, and we create these experiences around that, right? Same way with like a lesson, right? You can pull up a video in between, show a little clip. You can then put out a question to the students, let them answer. You can visualize what everyone answered, put out a word cloud, or we have over 22 types of questions. So this is generally what Quizzes does for a classroom. Right now, how AI comes into this is that uh, for a teacher, as we've talked, right, they have so many things to do in a day, right? Like teaching in the class is probably 4 or 5 hours of their day, right? But then they're giving assignments out. They have to grade that. That's a couple of hours of work. Then they have to plan for all these 4 or 5 classes the next day, right? They have to decide what topics they're going to cover, how they're going to teach it, right? Find some relevant content, maybe create an assignment. With AI, we can help at every stage of this, right? So today already, even before AI, Quizzes had through these millions of users on our platform. So one thing about Quizzes is that all the content is created by teachers, right? We don't have a content team that is creating this content, which is part of the reason why we've been able to scale. So you could think of us as, we are like, say, YouTube as versus you could compare your traditional publishers to like a Netflix, right? So they have a set of proprietary content. YouTube is, the world is just uploading, and you have some great content creators, you have some more casual creators, but overall you find a huge variety of things there because it's open to everybody. And so Quizzes is more like that, right, where you have literally hundreds of millions of content pieces uploaded from literally every country in the world, in every language you could imagine, covering any topic that you could think of, more or less. And so now, earlier, a teacher would look through this database and often find something relevant, but sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they would need to modify this content a bit to suit their immediate needs, and that itself was helpful, right? Even if you don't find the exact thing, if you find something that's 50% there, that much time saved. And we made with AI now, in every step, right, when they're creating this content, they can put in a topic and create something, but they can also take one of these existing resources and modify it, right? They can say add 5 more questions of this type, or add a few questions from this topic. And the good thing is that we all know that AI is not perfect, right? It hallucinates, it has its issues, and so it's a big advantage where AI is able to leverage our existing content and piggyback off of that, right? So a teacher now can take something that was made by somebody who knows their syllabus, right, and tweak that with the help of AI. So now they can say add a few more, add some numerical problems like this with bigger numbers, and these are the things that AI does really well. What it can also do is help them grade the results, right? Now this is another something that takes hours and hours of a teacher every week. Right now, if they put in a few model answers, AI can is finally technology is at a place where it can do a good job of grading these things. Earlier, it would be pretty a very rigid sort of, it would look for some keywords, or a very rudimentary sort of comparison. Now AI can actually see, did the student get it right? Did they actually capture the essence? How close was it? And give a very nuanced sort of grading to it, which in most cases is good enough, right? The teacher is also, it's not like there's the UPSC exam where they need it to be totally perfect. As long as it's 90% there, I think it's a big time saving that a teacher will be happy with offloading. And similarly with even help for students, right? Now a student gets something wrong, they can ask the teacher, but again there's 40-50 students in a class, right? How does a teacher cater to all of them? And that's again where we are now able to generate specific hints based on exactly what the student answered, right? So if they got something wrong and that wrong answer has some sort of misconception embedded into it, right, it can highlight that, right? It can say that you answered this maybe because maybe you thought this, but here's the right way to think about this. And or even help them with a way to remember this next time. And there's a lot of ways that AI is helping even on supporting the students to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely, Deepak. I think that was an amazing and a comprehensive understanding of how Quizzes is positioned to reshape the edtech offerings, and how probably it's going to improve the entire learning and accessibility of online education that way. So I think it more sounds like, Quizzes is making an impact globally, and it's trying to make the entire learning more inclusive and fun, and also, addressing the barriers in education that we're currently facing, specifically in India, I would say. But can you share some like real world examples as to how Quizzes has had particular client of yours to improve education system, or any such case studies that you think our listeners would be delighted to hear?
Yeah, so in fact, due to our scale, you'll actually find probably, over a dozen research studies published by actually independent researchers around the world who've actually used quizzes to see how it has improved learning outcomes, right? So there are multiple studies that, where people have basically, had a class that wasn't using quizzes or using some other sort of technology versus quizzes, and there have in all those cases a measurable improvement in learning, right? And what I would in a broad sense attribute it to is just this whole idea of getting the students engaged in the learning process, right? So uh, yeah, so in terms of real world examples, most of them, you know, sound like, teachers talking about how it, changed the, experience of their students, right? And I'll give one example, right? So recently we've launched a feature called accommodations, right? So what this does is that, in most classrooms, there are students with different, levels of, learning ability, right? And there are some ADHD or other, dyslexia, uh, these sort of, learning disabilities that come in the way of them, uh, despite having otherwise, maybe understanding the content or being able to actually perform well. But the standard way of assessing, or the one size fits all approach doesn't work for them, right? For example, there may be a student who is from another country, right? Now, they may know their language really well. Let's say a student just knows Hindi and they've suddenly been put into an English medium school, right? They may be brilliant at mathematics and science and all these subjects, but just because they don't know English, it'll look like they're a poor student, right? Similarly, if a student has dyslexia, right, they may be understanding the concepts, but they're just struggling to read because of the way the text is, right? And there are certain fonts that make it a lot easier for dyslexic individuals to read, right? And so with one of the functionalities we launched in Quizzes was the ability for teachers to customize, basically tag their students with these sort of accommodations, basically, right? Like this is in a sense a help for them to overcome some sort of barrier to their learning, right? And so an example there, right? Like, and how this works is that you know a lot of what we build is about really just understanding even the emotions and the feelings that are going on in the classroom, right? That and this is a good example of that, right? So a lot of the times what happens is a student with this sort of needing this sort of support will feel a little singled out, right? Like imagine a teacher comes out and hands out 5 papers, one paper to everybody, and then for this one student they come with a different one, right? Everybody notices, it makes that student feel like they are different, and usually not in a good way, right? And it sort of hampers their confidence and all of this, right? So what one teacher said is, so how this feature of ours works is that teacher enables these accommodations for the student, but nobody in the class really gets to know, right? It's just that student themselves that as they are doing it, it'll be a little different for them, right? Maybe it's translated to their language, or it's the question is read out loud and they're using headphones or something, and what they said is, there was a student in their class who, for the first time, they came up after that class and they were so happy, right? Because uh, they didn't have that sense of, being singled out, and they felt like they could do their best and they weren't having, those eyes on them, right? And So, it really was a heartwarming moment for that teacher, right? She said, I've never seen this student so engaged before.
Great, and I think when you're tailoring the approach to the specific needs of each user, it's pretty interesting to see that because it's quite essential when we are addressing the different human behavior and different user needs in different education system and infrastructure as well.
Hmm.
That way, I think it's for businesses. I think it's more like a game changer. Now, companies can increasingly invest in edtech solutions to provide their employees with some world-class training facilities, and they can be more competitive in a rapidly evolving job market. And with skills like AI or cybersecurity, for that matter, I think which these skills were niche once upon a time, and now they're becoming more mainstream. So I think the edtech industry is, stepping up somewhere to meet this demand. Having said that, can you tell us more about what are your plans for India and other developing markets, or your expansion plans that way, if you have laid down for that matter?
Sure. So, Quizzes today is already used in pretty much every country in the world, including India, and it is a fundamental tool in a lot of classrooms around the world, both in developed and developing nations, right? And a big reason for this is, I think, that quiz is a tool that offers a lot of different ways for the teacher to engage with their students, right? And it caters to all types of infrastructure setups, right? So if a school has a computer lab, then yeah, it'll work on those desktops, right? If a school is expecting students to bring their mobile phone, it'll work. We have apps that can work there, right? If teacher is using a projector or a smart board or you know a TV, right? It'll work on all of those, right? Similarly, or even beyond that, right? Like it works really well with even in low bandwidth situations, and it can even work if the students don't have any sort of device, right? We have something called paper mode, where teachers, as long as just the teacher has a smartphone, they can print out these sort of low res QR codes that can be scanned from 20, 30 feet away even. And so a teacher just standing in the middle of the room can ask a question, and students can respond based on the orientation in which they hold this QR code, right? So it signifies A, B, C, or D. So in this way, like, a teacher can conduct like a poll with the class and get this real-time result, which again is impossible to do without some sort of technology, because or it's not easy, at least, because if a teacher just asks a question and says who thinks the answer is A, and then says now who thinks it's B, what invariably happens is there are a few students in the class who everybody knows, they know this content, right? They're the best, and the moment they raise their hand, suddenly you will find the rest of the class agrees with them. Right? And so having this sort of a thing through this QR code, where every student is giving their own individual answer and can't really see what others are responding, gives the teacher a much truer sense of what the students have understood and not, while still letting them, and then letting them say reteach something. But it works even uh, without devices or internet with the students, which is pretty common in a lot of countries, right? Even developed nations, for that matter. So we are and looking to even go further beyond this, right? Can we even support worksheets, or like pen and paper, and bring that also support teachers in their activities, even that are paper based, right? Can a teacher print out a quiz that we have and give that out as a paper assignment, for example? Like, eventually can we even grade those? And these are things that we are continuing to invest in. Yeah.
Great, and I think moving forward, we'll be definitely would like to witness these advancements. And while there are different challenges, there are incredible opportunities as well. So I believe the edtech industry has a potential to change education in ways we have just only begun to imagine. And with more advancements in technologies like AI or virtual reality, I think the future learning is definitely going to be exciting. One last question for you, Deepak. What do you think? There are certain trends that you predict that would take place in the coming years in the edtech space, in future wise.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to predict the future, but I think AI is definitely something that is here to stay, right? I think it seems very clear, right? Like people have really embraced this because I think uh, most leaders have realized that this is something that they need to prepare their students and teachers to leverage. I think beyond that, I think technology is proliferating into every aspect of our lives, right? I think one of the interesting sort of tussles that's going on now is around this whole idea of screen time, right? That I think a lot of people don't necessarily want their student, their kids glued to a screen all the time, right? We know how social media and other platforms have become so addicting that right from when they're babies, kids are hooked to these platforms, and everybody is worried about how this generation uh, will turn out, right? The ones who are who've grown up in this very different way, right? Who knows? Nobody can really predict, and I think people are concerned about are they really getting a well-rounded education and experience growing up if it is all through the lens of these platforms that anyway have their own profit motives and all of that. So I think that will be an interesting thing to see how we put in the right guardrails for all of these, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's just screen time and having devices available ubiquitously, right? I think it's a thing that adults think about too, right? Are we ourselves getting addicted to our smartphones and all of that? But for the next generation, it feels like the impact is so much higher because we call as we say digital natives and all of that. I think a lot of people even my age, maybe in our teens, we started seeing computers, and then in college we got our first phones. But now the kids being born now have it pretty much the next day. So it'll be, I think that's what I see a lot of the conversations being around, right? Is what is the right way for us to leverage these really powerful technologies in a way that leads to well-rounded individuals, right? Yeah.
Well, yes, definitely, I agree with you. And I think as the world is changing rapidly, education must also change with it. And as per a discussion, I think I believe the edtech industry is definitely at a very pivotal moment right now. The innovations, that you mentioned, or certain trends that you think would take place in the edtech space, I think are opening up new possibilities for learners, for teachers, educators, and even institutions alike, for that matter. So I think it's a very exciting time, and we are just scratching the surface of what's really possible. This has been such an insightful conversation, Deepak. Thank you so much for your time and effort. I think it was definitely a thought-provoking conversation as to where we are standing in terms of edtech and probably where we can be and how we can change the entire learning. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and how quizzes is changing education through AI and other technologies.
Great. It was a pleasure chatting with you, Priya.
Great. Thank you so much, Deepak. This is for our listeners. I hope you have taken away some valuable insights on the role of technology in creating more engaging, accessible, and more efficient learning experiences. Stay tuned for upcoming podcasts, and you can view and listen all our previous podcasts on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.